10:10 Tuesday morning on the mighty BBC Tees. It seemed like a good idea at the time. You're so deeply in love that common sense perhaps evades you. The fairy tale wedding is a flurry of love, hearts and flowers, so you can't help but feel sorry for anyone when a marriage falls apart. But how long should you road test a partner before you marry? The singer Cheryl Fernandez-Vicini, the X Factor judge, has been in the headlines as his thought her 18-month marriage to 35-year-old Jean Bernard is over. They only went out, really, courting for 3 months. They married on the island of Mustique, but claims have been made that she didn't know enough about her husband-to-be before tying the knot. He apparently didn't understand the pressures of marrying somebody with such a high public profile. And then, of course, there's Rupert Murdoch and Jerry Hall. They've announced their engagement. Who knew? The 84-year-old executive chairman of the News Corporation and the 59-year-old former supermodel have placed an advert in The Times, one of the newspapers owned by Mr. Murdoch's company, that they've been dating since the summer. Who would have thought? How soon is too soon to marry, though? So if you got any thoughts on this, how long did you give it? How long did you go out with somebody before you decided to pop the question? Let's talk to Carol Walker from Relate North East. Morning to you, Carol.
Morning, Mike.
And on the other line, John Robinson, who's a divorce lawyer at Cygnet Law in Redcar. John, good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
First of all, Carol, then, how do you know if somebody is marriage material?
Well, I think it takes time to be able to talk to somebody and understand where they're coming from. I don't think it's a matter of, how long the courtship is. It's how much you can find out about somebody, and sometimes it could be years before you hit a blip where maybe a bereavement or something like that, and you don't understand how your partner's going to react, and they might react really differently to you, which is why it's important to think about what kind of relationship you want and the kind of person you want to spend time with, and try to find out more about the person.
So in Cheryl's case, it was 3 months. Does that seem a bit short to you?
Well, it could have been enough time if they'd been from similar backgrounds and they had the same kind of shorthand about talking about life and they had the same attitudes on life. But 3 months is not very long to find out a huge amount about somebody. You can't see people in all sorts of different situations. You can only see them in the situations you're currently in.
Yeah, clearly, there was a lack of understanding about the pressures of going out with a high-profile celebrity.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes if you're cocooned in your little bubble and there's no press there, then all of a sudden when the real world strikes and you're out in the real world where the press are and they're following your every move and everything's reported on, then reality hits home. And I think it's about finding out what the reality of your life is going to be like rather than actually just what happens in that little bubble of time when you're together.
Now, John, you're dealing with people face-to-face on a daily basis with this.
Yes.
If you only sort of go out with each other for a short time before getting married, is that going to lead to a failed marriage?
Not necessarily. I see people in all sorts of situations. I've seen people who've been together 50, 60 years before deciding to divorce. Equally, I've seen people who've, yes, had a whirlwind romance, and within a few months of getting married, they want to end the marriage, although these days you've got to be married at least a year before you can start divorce proceedings. I've had people who've broken up on the day of their wedding and have come to see me and said that they want to divorce later on.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And what on earth did they say on that occasion, then?
Well, it's a long time ago, but I've had a couple of situations like that. One where there was a brawl at the wedding reception between the bride and the groom's family, which led to the breakdown of the marriage. On another occasion, the wife told the groom on the wedding night that she'd been sleeping with one of his friends, and therefore she wasn't going to sleep with him, and that quite naturally led to a breakdown of the marriage.
So what do you think, then, is a sensible length of time to go out with somebody before you pop the question, based on your experience?
I think people should look at maybe a couple of years at least before deciding to take because obviously there's tremendous legal obligations to getting married, and I think perhaps a couple of years is more of a realistic time frame. But of course it's so impossible to say to people or legislate and say you've got to do this before you get married. I mean, in many ways, I think perhaps having a child is a more important step than getting married. I suppose then you'd have to think about legislating before people had children together.
Yeah, no, I suppose it depends how seriously. Sorry, you want to come in there, Carol?
Well, just even getting a mortgage and moving in together is a big commitment, and I think people think of it as something that's quite light, and it's not going to change their relationship. But once the reality of everyday life hits in, that's when you get to know somebody, and I think it's about getting to know somebody in as many different situations as possible, and finding out if it's if the way they react to certain things fits with what you want.
And I suppose it also depends on how seriously you take marriage.
That's right, yeah.
And do you think people take it seriously these days?
I think there's an image in the press that it's okay to get married, get divorced, get married again, and the images that you see in the press show celebrities who don't apparently seem to be very upset, and people in the real world don't realise that any relationship breakup, whether it's a marriage or people cohabiting or people just going out together, that's very upsetting and can leave you with scars which can have a huge impact on future relationships. But what they see is that this image in the press that it's okay to get married and then break up and get married to someone else fairly quickly, and that's not the real world. And I think people need to be thinking about what the real world is, not what the image that society's kind of projecting to them.
Yeah, and John, the number of younger people getting married is now at the highest level since the 1990s. So why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think a lot of younger people are making commitments to live together, and I think there is an element of press pressure where they see that celebrities who are quite young getting married, and maybe there is an image thing in relation to that. And it is a fact that if you get married younger, you're a bit more likely to get divorced than if you get married at a later. Although overall, the average age for getting married is actually in your 40s, or late 20s, and getting divorced in your 40s. So although people do get married young, it doesn't necessarily mean that it leads to inevitable divorce.
I was talking about this to somebody yesterday, Carol, who said, I was asking them, why are you getting married? And she said, well, it's what you do, isn't it? It's this expectation.
It is, yes. And I think a lot of people focus on the day. We've been to a few wedding fairs kind of promoting our workshop Before You Say I Do, and we've been to a few wedding fairs, and the very fact that people are focusing on a wedding day for 2 years, that becomes the focus of their life, and then when they get married they haven't thought about what the real life is, when you're putting the bin out or who's going to do the housework. And however much we try not to, we've all got these little messages in our head which says a wife should and a husband should, and if your partner's not meeting up to those expectations that you have and you can't figure out a way to express them, then it might lead to dissatisfaction after the marriage.
But I suppose, John, if you've been living together for say 10 years before you get married, then you know exactly what it's going to be like.
Yes, I think on average that would make the chance of your marriage being more successful. But having said that, I've had a number of clients who've been to see me. They've been together 15, 20 years living together, then take the decision to get married, and within a year, 2 years, suddenly they want a divorce. So it's not always a guide that is going to be successful.
So I wonder what happens after all that time.
It is strange. I mean, sometimes it is a particular thing, like was mentioned earlier, like a bereavement, or often, obviously, people meet other people, and in adultery situations whereby that happens, and that can happen after a long time of marriage.
Thank you very much, John and Carol. I'm going to open the lines up to you now. If you've got experience of this, what advice would you give to other people then who are thinking about getting married? How long would you run the road test for, if I can put it that way?